We begin with a walk down memory lane. So it's now 8 a.m., time for the meeting to start. We all file into the conference room. We are a newly assembled team of 12. There are 9 on the client side and 3 on the consulting side, including me. The vibe, it's a little awkward as it is, when you're just getting to know one another. The environment, the setting, in a word, depressing. Tiny little windowless conference rooms, kind of dark and dingy, and huge table takes up most of the room. Circa 1960s furniture before vintage was cool. But in spite of my environment, I'm actually feeling really, really good about myself. I have a really nice leather portfolio for note-taking that I put in front of me on the table, a very expensive pen, brand new stack of business cards. I may not know naval shipyards, but hey, I know stuff. I am 23 years old. And then the lead on the client side decides to open up the meeting, and all of my confidence and bravado, boom, it evaporates in an instant. Because here's how he opens up the meeting, and he is, by the way, shall we say, a tad more seasoned than I am. Here's what he says. He says, well, guess we ought to go around and do that introduction stuff. Let's have everybody say, how long you been on the yard, and what do you bring into this party? Just by show of hands, anyone in the room ever had one of those moments in life, ever, where you just wish that the ground would open up and swallow you whole? Just ever in your life? Yes, thank you for your honesty. This is one of those moments for me. It is my first real job out of college. I have been a consultant for approximately 2 weeks. This is my first project. It's my first client. It's my first client meeting. It is my first time ever on a shipyard. How many people in the room have ever been on or near a shipyard? By a show of hands. So shout out. Give me some words you would use to describe the environment of a shipyard. Rough. Noisy. Smelly. Dirty. Rough, noisy, smelly, dirty, mostly male. So you can imagine me, my suited up, fully accessorized self, in the rough, noisy, smelly, dirty, mostly male environment. You can imagine my internal state on this day. I'm excited. It's my first ever client meeting. I'm nervous. It's my first ever client meeting. And I'm so eager to make a good first impression on everyone with whom I come in contact. So you can imagine my internal state when I hear that I'm to answer the following 2 questions. How long you been on the yard, and what do you bring into the party? Because the fact of the matter is I've been on the yard for, 7.5 minutes. And what am I bringing to the party? So my palms start to sweat, and my stomach starts to turn. And then I have an idea. I think to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I may be new, but I'm pretty smart. I'm going to orchestrate it so that I go last. I'll buy myself a little time, see how everybody else answers the question. Well, turns out to be the first and most assuredly not the last time I make a really, really, really bad call in the middle of a client meeting, because by the time it is my turn to go, I learned that every single member of the client team, all 9 of them, all of whom happen to be male, by the way, have been working on the shipyard longer than I have been alive. It would be really funny if it weren't true. So there I am. Spotlight on me, nowhere to go. My moment of truth. And the question is, in this moment of truth, what should I do? And because I have no doubt that all of you are much smarter than I was in that particular moment, that's my question to all of you. I'm actually going to give you 4 possible options. We'll take a poll by a show of hands. In this moment of truth, what should I do? Option A is I should leave the room to answer an urgent phone call. Option B is I should take a deep breath, just tell the truth, spill the beans, chips fall where they may. Option C is I should focus my answer on the things that I learned in college, by the way, just the semester before, but the things that I'm pretty sure are going to be relevant to the project. And, maybe I don't have to disclose the source, but the fact of the matter is this is a critical opportunity for me to build my credibility. They need to know that I'm bringing something to the party. That's option C. And option D is I should put on my best 2-week-old consultative finesse subtle self and find a way to redirect attention to them. Something along the lines of, enough about us, let's talk more about you. So how many of you think by show of hands I should choose option A? How many are the most tempted by option A? Thank you for your honesty. How many like option B the best? So there are quite a few hands going up in the room, and I suspect there are some who are voting for option C, who's in the C camp. All right, so maybe like a tenth of the room going for C, and who likes option D? All right, maybe about a tenth of the room for option D. Okay, good. Here's what I did. I chose option C. I proceeded to regale them with as much jargon as I could recall from the prior semester. I had an IT degree, and we were doing some data modeling, and I told them about how I knew Jordan DeMarco data modeling and IDEF modeling and this and that and the other. And I spoke for maybe 2.5 minutes, which was probably 2 minutes and 15 seconds too long. And you can get the sense of exactly what was happening. The longer I spoke and the harder I tried to appear knowledgeable and smart and credible, the more naive and inexperienced I proved myself to be. Now, looking back, I wish I had chosen option B. I wish that I had simply had the presence of mind with a certain degree of confidence, mind you, not in a wimpy, weak, loser kind of way, but with a certain degree of confidence. I wish I had had the presence of mind to simply answer the questions directly and honestly. And looking back now at the situation, the reason that I wish that is the following. I have learned some things now that I didn't know and understand then about what it takes to build extraordinary trust-based relationships, especially when they're new relationships. For example, I now know that experience is just one way to build credibility. Honesty is another. I also now know that the thing we are the most afraid to say, more often than not, is exactly what will build the most trust in any given moment. And I now know that the relationship between trust building and risk taking is that they are like this. They are inextricably intertwined. You do not get one without the other. Now, I chose option C in that moment for the simple reason that I was uncertain and I was afraid. And I realized when I look back at what is now over 20 years that I have been in and around the consulting industry, I have spent an extraordinary amount of time uncertain and afraid, simply trying to figure out what's the right thing to do in this given moment. What is the right thing to say? And I have not a doubt that every single one of you in this room, and there are a lot of you in this room, every single one of you can relate. You can relate to the pressure that we all sometimes feel. Whether the pressure is real or whether the pressure is imagined, you can relate to the pressure that we all sometimes feel to please our client, to have the right answer, and to look good in a moment of truth. Very, very real, very understandable human vulnerabilities that actually come with a cost. And they especially come with a cost when we're working in a C-suite. Because when we fail to be aware of and to successfully say the word successfully, we fail to be aware of and successfully manage these very real, very understandable human vulnerabilities, we, for example, waste so much time and energy trying to be someone or something we're not. We lose opportunities, we miss opportunities to make profound and deep connections with other people. We compromise our ability to be influential for the very same reason that we're failing to connect, because our attention is all over here instead of being out there. And perhaps more than anything, we fail to distinguish ourselves as a safe haven for tough issues, which is the essence of what it means to be a trusted advisor. It is the simplest and most profound definition I know. 5 words: safe haven for tough issues. And nowhere is that more the case than in the C-suite, where time is short, visibility is high, and the opportunities to really distinguish ourselves and differentiate at least seem to come few and far between. So there is real value to be gained in learning more and better understanding our very real, very human vulnerabilities, becoming aware of them, learning how to manage them, and understanding very clearly, what does it take to bridge the gap? What does it really take to establish those extraordinary trust-based relationships? And the good news is that the investment that's required to learn about these things is well worth the effort, because the upside is enormous. In fact, let's take a moment to talk a little bit about that upside. In the spirit of the old game show Family Feud, who remembers the original game show Family Feud? Thank you, it's not just me. Good to know. So in the spirit of Richard Dawson, we're going to come up with 5 things. Survey says 5 things. Here's what we're going to come up with: the top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace. And what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to cue you, and chaos is going to ensue, because I'm going to ask you to turn to 1 or 2 colleagues sitting near you and come up with, as quickly as you can, what's your list of the top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace. You have a total of 2 minutes to accomplish this task with your colleagues. Top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace. On your marks, get set, go. That's time. Let's come back together. The gong, very popular, available on Amazon.com, just so you know, and I get no commission from telling you that. It's called a vibratone gong. I highly recommend it. Comes in handy. So let's talk about the top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace. Number 5, survey says creativity and innovation. Yay, the people who had that on their list are so excited. Not that you all are a competitive bunch or anything. With trust comes freedom, an essential ingredient for creativity and innovation in the workplace. Survey says number 4, information sharing. Anybody a yay for information sharing? Yeah, all right, a round of applause for information sharing. With that freedom also comes the willingness and the ease to disclose, to open up, to exchange, to collaborate. Survey says number 3, productivity. Yay for productivity. With trust, everything is easier and faster, period. There's a reason that Stephen M. R. Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. Survey says number 2, engagement. Anybody? So far, productivity is the most popular. Engagement. David Zinger, somebody I know you may be familiar with as well. He's based in Canada, an employee engagement expert. He talks about how critical it is that you have authentic connection to have engagement. And with trust, authentic connection really is possible. And survey says, number 1, anyone want to guess? Influence. How did you know? Welcome to Trust and Influence, making the C-suite your sweet spot. Influence. So with trust comes a willingness of others to be changed by you. And when that happens, learning and growth is possible on a personal level and on an organizational level. Now, just by show of hands, how many groups had something pretty close to all 5 out of 5, no matter what order? All right, good job. And how many had like 4 out of 5? And anyone 3 out of 5? All right, give yourselves a round of applause. Now, here's the question, and it's a critical question. How do we get these results consistently and sustainably? How do we get them at an organizational level? How do we get them at an interpersonal level? And specifically, how do we get them as practitioners in our relationships in the C-suite? And that's exactly what we're going to answer between now and 11:15 today. So we have a roadmap to answer that question. We are going to talk about what it really takes to be trustworthy, what it really takes to be influential, and what it really takes to establish a habit of trust, to make trust building a habit. What it really takes to be trustworthy, what it really takes to be influential, what it really takes to make a habit of trust. Because, by the way, myths and misperceptions abound on this topic. And if we're going to figure out how to get those top 5 results consistently and sustainably, we have to bust those myths. We have to embrace the paradoxical nature of this topic and figure out how to make the most of it rather than have it work against us. Now, what Gary and I are going to talk with you about today is based on the work that originally started with 3 authors in the year 2000, David Maister, Charles H. Green, and Rob Galford, with a book called The Trusted Advisor, which some of you may know. Charlie Green then went on to solo author a book called Trust-Based Selling, and Charlie and I together joined forces to create the Trusted Advisor Field Book, which came out in late 2011, which happened to be, by the way, the same year that the original book with the yellow cover, The Trusted Advisor, was cited by 1-800-CEO Read as number 7 on the list of top 25 business books 11 years after its publication. It's pretty extraordinary for a business book. So I am privileged to be immersed in this material, having spent 20 years in and around consulting. What I do with my life now, and have for the past 7 years, is lead programs on what does it really take to be extraordinary, to have trust-based relationships in the workplace. And it's a privilege to share the cover of the book with Charlie. By the way, as was mentioned in my introduction, if any of you are interested, I'm scurrying off pretty quickly after the session to do, I've got like a 15-minute window to sign as many books as you all would like me to sign. I will be hanging out there, though, in the bookstore. If you would like to talk or have a conversation, my flight's not till 5, got all the time in the world. Gary will be hanging around a little bit as well after the session, although he's got a flight a little bit sooner than that. But I'm happy to make myself, and we're happy to make ourselves available to you, that contact information that was in the beginning, which I'll repeat at the end. Make use of that. I'll be bold like Dan Pink was. I'm giving you my cell phone number. It's up there. And just for the record, I had it up there before he did his presentation. Just to be clear. Now, you've got takeaways on the SHRM site. You can get access to this presentation, which, by the way, is a little bit updated from the one that we had to turn into the conference folks about a month ago. I also have a URL for you on one of my websites. It's called getrealnow.com. If you go to /SHRM 2013, you can get a zip file. And by the way, it's a no strings attached zip file. There's no you've got to register for a newsletter, blah, blah, blah. There's a zip file you can download that has this presentation in it. It has an ebook excerpt from the field book on selling to the C-suite. And by the way, just because your business card doesn't say you're in sales, if Dan Pink didn't bring this home yesterday, I don't know who does. We are all in sales. We are all selling to the C-suite every day. It also has, for you to make available to your colleagues as you wish, any of the materials in here, but all of the worksheets in the Trusted Advisor Field Book and short chapter synopses are available in both PDF and Word format. You don't even have to buy the book if you want to get access to the synopsis and the worksheets. And there's something else in there, too, that's completely escaping me at the moment. I'm sure I'll remember between now and 11:14. So that's available to you on that website. Now, if you learn something that's of value to you, maybe you already have, between now and the time we close, Gary and I would be so excited if you shared about that and tweeted. And these are our Twitter handles. I know this is a very Twitter-friendly crowd. And here's my crazy request. My request is that if you're going to tweet, do it at 11:16. Make a quick note. If you're going to text, do it at 11:16. If you're going to respond to an email, do it at 11:16. And I make that request not because I have an extreme narcissistic need for your attention, although that's a little bit true. I make the request because here's the thing. To build trust with another human being requires us to be present and focused and attentive in a way that we rarely are in today's business world. And my invitation to you is to treat this precious time that we have here in this room as a learning laboratory, as sacred time for you to just let the distractions go, take a deep breath, settle in, zoom in, and give this the same kind of attention that you would want your C-level executives to feel you were giving them. On the subject of what it really takes to be trustworthy, here's the thing. If you were to look up trust in the dictionary, turns out it's a little bit of a waste of time. So many shades of gray, and by the way, it's completely contextual. You trust your dog with your life, but not with your lunch. So, is your dog trustworthy or not? Well, the answer is it absolutely, completely depends. And my colleague and co-author, Charlie Green, endeavored to deal with this issue 13 years ago when he co-authored the Trusted Advisor by creating, out of the ambiguity around this topic, creating clarity. And he did that by creating something that he called the trust equation, which is arrayed as a formula with 4 variables. We're going to share with you a little bit about each of the variables. Now, the first of the 4 variables, C for credibility, is very much what was at stake for me that day in the shipyard. Was I going to kill it or build it, depending upon how I answered those 2 questions, how long you've been in the yard and what do you bring into the party? Because here's what I was focused on. I was focused on experience, expertise, quals. And it's what most of us focus on when it comes to credibility. And it is an important part of credibility, and it is not all of what credibility is about, because it turns out as important, if perhaps not more important, is honesty or truthfulness. Because we can actually build more credibility in an instant by being honest, saying things like, hey, I'm brand new, or, gee, I don't know, or, I screwed that up. We can actually build more credibility in that moment than in any form of spin-spun answer. Wow, I'm doing really well with the English language today. Than any form of spin in our response that we could come up with, no matter how sophisticated and nuanced we think our spin is. We can build more credibility in that moment with that kind of honesty, because here's what we communicate when we do that. We communicate something that is so much more important than data that's on our resume. We communicate that we are someone who can be counted on to be real. Straight up, no spin. What you see is what you get. And nowhere is this more important than in the C-suite. In the executives that I've worked with and I have heard speaking to the professional services firms who are my clients, C-level execs beg for the hard truth. They want the tough messages. They want to hear the stuff that nobody else has the courage to tell them. Now, in addition to that, there are some very specific ways that Gary's going to share with you that HR practitioners can excel when it comes to credibility. Can we please have a round of applause for my co-presenter, Gary Jones?
Thanks, Andrea. It's great to be here with you and share this session, and with you, thank you for coming. You know, how does all of this apply to human resources, and particularly as we're trying to build trust and influence 1, 2, 3, 4 levels, perhaps, above where we currently are? And I think there are some really hands-on things that you can do. And the first is, know the field of HR. I almost feel embarrassed by putting that bullet point up to a room full of HR professionals. But let's think about HR for a minute. I would be challenged to think of another profession that is as broad and as deep in what you need to know as HR. There's a lot to know. comp, benefits, safety, engagement, employee relations, morale. And then there's the whole thing about who in the world understands human behavior, and we deal with human resources. So know the field of HR. But specifically, what do you need to know? SHRM has a terrific competency model. And it talks about all of the competencies that we need as HR professionals. And the really cool thing is it breaks it down by where we are in our career. So if we are beginning our HR career, it will tell us what we need to know about comp and benefits and safety and morale and management and human behavior. Then for the middle years of our practice, or the middle level of competency, senior level of competency, and then executive level of competency. And so I think it's really important that we focus on what is it we really need to know. There's a lot we need to know. So at our particular stage in our career, what should we be masters of? What should we have a good working knowledge of if we're building trust and credibility, so that the C-suite will listen to what we have to say and trust what we have to say? Next. Only speak as an authority when you are one. I have 2 words for you. Inflated resumes. I heard groans. Anyone see inflated resumes? Everyone knows? Yeah, sure. How many of us have had a job posted, even with a search firm, or maybe we're sourcing it ourselves, and we get a resume in, and we can hardly wait to meet this person? They have all of the experience, all of the background. They have solved world issues in HR. And so they're the perfect fit. And so we bring them in for the interview, and what happens? We find out that they really don't have as much experience as they said they had in safety or health and welfare benefits. And what's our response to that? Yuck. We wasted our time. Why did the person not just be honest with us? All right, here's a little known fact. As HR professionals, we face that same temptation to inflate our resumes. Maybe not in writing, but to imply, and maybe sometimes to imply by silence, that our expertise is actually greater than it is. I'll never forget one of my first vivid temptations in that regard. I was working for a retail wholesale, specialty retail and wholesale firm. We had like 18 stores in Atlanta. And my CEO said, we need a variable compensation program for our store managers and our salespersons. I was so tempted to just be silent and keep nodding, which means I can do that. But the truth is, I had never designed that kind of a program in that kind of a setting for that kind of a business. But it was sure tempting to inflate the resume. So only speak as an authority when we are authorities. And perhaps you are. Perhaps you've done special work in performance management or in variable compensation, and you are the authority. By all means, speak as one. But that honesty is very important. And last, provide evidence of an informed opinion. Sometimes we're a little shy because we don't want to be that person who's always talking about where I've been and what I've done and what I can do and etc. And I understand that. That gets really tiring. But the truth is, by this point in our HR careers, we've all done something really cool. And we've had successes, and we've built programs, and maybe we've had some failures that were awesome because we learned, and it made us a better HR professional. You're here to learn and grow and experience this whole conference. That's what it's about, right? So at the appropriate time with your C-suite, there will be a conversation about benefits. And if you just went to the coolest benefits presentation while you were here and you learned something that's germane to the conversation, speak up, share that expertise. People want to know what you bring to the table. And that's your opportunity. Something you've read, something you've experienced, something you've taught, something you've observed. Don't be afraid to speak up. The C-suite wants to hear what you have to say.
One of the questions I often get, by the way, is, Andrea, how do we get around the fact that trust building takes time? We don't have a lot of time, especially working with C-level execs. There is not a lot of time. How do you get around that? And my answer is simple. It's easy because it's not a fact that trust building takes time. Of the 4 variables we're going to talk about, only one absolutely requires the passage of time, and it is not credibility. We can establish high degrees of credibility in an instant by being willing to, for example, answer a direct question with a very open and direct, in an open and direct way. And the bookmark that many of you got on your chairs, and apologies to those in the room, I had enough for 600, and I think we've gone on tilt because we have more than that in the room now. There are extras you can get as you walk out the door, but there's a bookmark. The green side of the bookmark has tips on 15 ways to build trust fast. I'll tell you now, they are organized by the 4 variables of the trust equation. So the first 4 tips map to credibility. And there is an ebook, by the way, or there will be, if I can remember to make sure that there will be, that describes those 15 tips in greater detail in the zip file that I told you about at getrealnow.com/SHRM 2013. Let's talk about the second variable of 4 on the trust equation, and we're going to tee this up with a scenario. Here's the scenario. You've got a meeting. You've got a meeting. You have promised your CFO a report by what you said was close of business. It's getting late in the day, and you realize you're not going to be able to get it done until 8 o'clock, done and delivered until 8 o'clock the following morning, and you know that your CFO gets in at 9. So the question is, what do you do? And I'm going to pose 4 possible options to you. We'll take a vote and then talk about the answers. The 4 possible options, and by the way, the question here is, what should you do? Not what do you do, because oftentimes there is a difference. Even for me, there is a gap between what we know we should do and what we do. So the first option is, look, there are bigger fish to fry. You decide not to worry about it. In fact, that's the most trust-building thing to do, is not to make a mountain out of a molehill. That's option A. Option B is that when you deliver it at 8 o'clock in the morning, you accompany it with a quick note acknowledging that it was promised for close of business and it is technically late. Option C is that before you wrap up, you actually take a moment to send a message saying, hey, won't be able to get it to you until 8, recognizing that I promised COB. And the 4th option is you send a message to your teammate with a copy to your CFO saying, hey, when are you going to get that report already? So how many of you say what you should do is option A? How many say option B? I've got a couple hands for B. How many like C the best? We got a lot of hands going up in the room. And how many like D? How many are the most tempted by option D? Thank you for your honesty. Those of you who are raising your hand, very credible response, by the way. So here's the thing. This scenario tees us up to talk about the second variable, reliability, which of the 4 is the only one that absolutely positively requires the passage of time, because reliability is in essence about your actions. It's about your consistency and your predictability. Credibility is about your words. Reliability is about your actions. To what extent does what you do match up with what you've promised you will do? And by the way, when there is a disconnect, how quickly do you get in communication about it? Because that's the funny thing about reliability, is that we can actually maintain, if not increase our score, when we break our promises, if we get in communication about having broken our promises. I'm not a big fan, as a matter of fact, controversially, of the whole under-promise, over-deliver mantra. I'm a fan of promise, deliver, and when there's a gap, get in communication. Now, so for this reason, the most trustworthy response on the prior slide is option C, which is what most of you raised your hand for. Remember, what we should do isn't always what we do. I let guilt and other things get in my way of always choosing option C. But it is the most trustworthy response, even though it may seem a bit mundane, and it is absolutely true that you do have bigger fish to fry, and there are worse things you could do from a trust-building standpoint than be a few hours late with a report, especially if they might not even notice. Here's the thing, though. Reliability is a bit mundane. And when we consistently choose option C, getting in communication, paying attention to the details, we are communicating something about us that in a lot of ways is far more important than the deadline itself. We communicate that we are someone who can be counted on for things big as well as small, small as well as big. And from an HR standpoint, Gary's got a couple best practices.
And that's actually how you build reliability. The first point is to handle the little things well. Now, when I'm receiving the paycheck, it's not a little thing. I want it on time. I want it for the right amount, or actually the right amount. I want my benefits to be administered well. I want payroll to go well. I want the organization to fulfill its promise on the tactical things, the little things. And it's interesting because we all want to have influence at that next level or the next level on top of that. Yet it's awfully hard for our CXOs to hear us when we're bringing strategic initiatives if everyone else in the organization is talking about errors in payroll and benefits administration. So just remember that in order for us to gain an entree and to build that sense of reliability, we have to deliver the service promise that we all have as HR professionals. Tied with that, if you're wanting to influence C-suite and become a trusted advisor, it's really important to deliver on those promises. And so if you've promised your CFO or your CXO a compensation report and analysis Wednesday by noon, have it done Wednesday by noon. Make sure it's accurate. Make sure it's thorough. Make sure it's complete. But things don't always go well in HR on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but I start with my Outlook calendar, and it looks so cool. I know what I'm going to get done. And then what happens? About 9 o'clock, something changes. That special meeting, that special urgency comes up that demands my attention. Or maybe the project I promised my CFO has some bumps in the road I didn't think about, and it's going to take longer. So there are times when we can't make that service promise 100%. And when those times occur, as Andrea said, pick up the phone, walk down the hall, and let them know the status of the project, and very briefly why it's not going to be delivered on time. Reliability is built one transaction at a time. And what I would urge all of us to remember is every encounter we have with the CXO is really an audition for leadership. So we need to handle those auditions well by handling those tactical things with excellence. And by the way, why wouldn't we want to do that for everyone? Why wouldn't we want to deliver on our promise to the mailroom person and the administrative assistant and the VPs and the managers and the line employees? Why wouldn't we want to deliver the same excellence to them? One thing about HR, raise your hand if you agree, people talk in organizations. How much of our time every day do we spend dealing with people talking and the consequences thereof, right? Guess what? Sometimes they're talking about us. Sometimes they're talking about human resources and what happened that was great or what didn't happen that should have happened, or maybe what happened that everyone wishes didn't happen. So just remember, our CXOs are listening to those conversations. And what a great stamp of reliability we can gain from our peers and from the people we serve when the CXO knows we deliver on the service promise. We are, in fact, reliable.
Now, I did say that reliability is the only variable of the trust equation that absolutely positively requires the passage of time, and it can be accelerated. So on your bookmark on the green side, numbers 5, 6, and 7 give you some specific tips for how you can accelerate the improvement of your reliability score. Let's move on to variable number 3. We're going to do this with another scenario. So here's the situation. Paul, your CEO, is 10 minutes late to your one-on-one meeting. And by the way, this is highly unusual. Let's assume for Paul this is highly unusual for the sake of this situation. And he mentions in passing that he's dealing with issues at home before the meeting officially begins. And throughout the meeting, he seems very distracted. And the question is, what should you do? 4 options. Option A, the most trustworthy thing to do is to stay focused on the agenda. That is the most respectful, the best thing in the face of his distractions. Option B, you make a mental note about his distraction, and maybe once the meeting has ended, when you've gotten your tasks complete, you'll check in and see if he's okay. Option C, you make a mental note of his distraction, and then look for ways that your team can be especially helpful this week, because clearly he's got some stuff going on. And option D is you actually pause in the middle of the meeting to say something along the lines of, Paul, you seem distracted. So what should you do? How many choose option A? You're starting to see how I game these answers, right? How many like B? Okay, we've got some hands for B. Excellent. How many like option C? Some hands in the room for that. And how many are going for D? The majority of the hands going for option D. This situation tees us up to talk about intimacy, and we have now moved from green to red. We've moved from the more rational and logical aspects of trust building to the more psychological or emotional aspects of trust building. And intimacy is a deliberately provocative word to use in a business setting, especially amongst a bunch of HR practitioners. Let me define exactly what we mean by that. By the way, there are many paths that lead to intimacy that don't have anything to do with privacy or being inappropriate or even necessarily being friends outside of work with people. It doesn't. That's often a nice byproduct. It's not the pathway to get there. 3 primary paths that I want you to remember for intimacy. One is discretion. And I assume I don't have to explain that in this room, what that means. The second is empathy, which I would simply define as relating easily to others and being easy to relate to. And the third is risk-taking, being the one who's willing to say the thing that others won't, ask the thing that others won't, maybe reveal some aspect of your humanity in a way that others are too afraid to do it. Discretion, empathy, and risk-taking. Now, the riskiest option in this scenario, in fact, and the one that is likely to build the most trust as a result, is what most of you raised your hands for, option D, pausing in the middle of the meeting to make an observation. Now, by the way, all 4 of these, unlike my prior scenarios, all 4 of these are totally viable. Now, B and C I happen to like a little bit more because they show that you're paying attention and that you care, a little more than just staying strictly task-focused. The reason I like D even better than B and C is because it shows right then, right there, that you're paying attention and that you care. And, how Paul responds doesn't matter nearly as much as what you have done through your gesture. Now, by the way, if he's aloof about it, doesn't want to talk about it, you're clear that there's some resistance or discomfort, I am not suggesting that you get in his face and push. Come on, Paul, I'm the HR person, you can tell me. What I'm suggesting is that by making the observation, by pausing in that moment, you are communicating something really important. Several things, as a matter of fact. That number one, you are the kind of person that he can talk to about anything, whether he chooses to or not. You are that person. You communicate that you don't just see him as an agenda, you see him as a person. And you communicate that above all else, you're actually willing to take risks in the relationship, and you're listening to him because, by the way, he's the one who opened the door in the first place. He mentioned in passing that he was dealing with issues at home. There's an argument to be made that says that, in fact, it is disrespectful not to follow up on that in some way. Just an argument to be made, something that I want you to consider. I have a hand here. Yes?
I agree with you on a one-on-one meeting, but if I agree if this is a one-on-one meeting, but if this was a team meeting, then you might consider another option.
Correct. So very well stated. Thank you for bringing that point. And the scenario was deliberately set out as a one-on-one meeting. In a team meeting, I think it does change. And there is something to be said, and it depends on who's in the room, how big is the meeting, who's on the team. What I do want you to consider, though, is if he mentions it in passing in front of the whole group, it may be okay to say something in front of the whole group. And by the way, if the meeting is totally unproductive because there's some kind of distraction, which also, by the way, might not have anything to do with issues at home, he just may need to get a little refocused. If you choose to push forward with the agenda, you may be missing opportunities not only to get some real work done, but missing opportunities to build trust in the process. So I completely agree that it's different. What I don't agree with is that always in team meetings you would never go with option D. I want you to factor in and start considering for yourselves the options that are riskier than the ones you normally take. Because of the relationship between trust building and risk taking, we mess that up all the time because we say to ourselves, I couldn't possibly take that kind of risk until I have a certain level of trust in the relationship. And here's the funny thing about that. We get that level of trust in the relationship by taking those risks. So when we wait, we chase a target that is always moving. I saw a hand.
Would it be appropriate to ask him if he would like to reschedule for another time when he's more focused?
So the question is, would it be appropriate to ask to reschedule? And the answer is it might be, absolutely. Now you notice that what I suggested as the option was simply to make an observation and to pause. Paul, you seem distracted. And see where he takes it from there. And he could go any number of places. The offer to reschedule could be right on point, and maybe it's too extreme a response. You know, maybe once again, his mind just drifted. He's got a really pressing meeting coming up right after you, and he just needs to get regrounded where he is. Who knows? But yeah, your willingness to let go of what I like in the spirit behind your question, your willingness to let go of your attachment to get your agenda handled is what's critical when it comes to building trust-based relationships. Now, we talked a little bit about empathy. So we've talked about risk-taking in this scenario, and I said discretion, empathy, and risk-taking were the three pathways. I know of nothing more powerful in your relationships with a C-suite than your willingness and ability to get in their world. And it's hard because their world is not like our world. Their world is a very, very different and very, very challenging world for a lot of reasons. Now, here's where, for those of you who actually got glasses, and if you didn't, pretend that you have them, I'd like you to open up your glasses. See, we're all about building trust. We don't care if we look silly. And here's my question to you. Look at and experience the world from your CXO's perspective. This is your perspective. This is your CXO's perspective. And I invite you to consider, pick one C-level executive in your organization, or maybe who's a client of yours, who you'd like to have a better relationship with, or maybe you'd like to have a relationship with, period. You're looking through his or her lenses right now. Take a moment, look at and experience the world from your CXO's perspective. My question to you is, what's it like? You know, Gary, I don't know, I'm thinking about a C-level client that I have right now, and if I look at the world through his perspective, it's stressful. That would be one answer to that question for me. It is very, very stressful. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Turn to a neighbor, 30 seconds per person. Talk about what it's like looking through these lenses. What are the words that you would come up with? On your marks, get set, go. Okay, that's time. Let's get back together. Shout out what words you came up with. Lonely. You can only see your part of the picture. Stressful. Biased.
Competitive.
Complicated. Competitive. Tiring. producing, demanding. Excellent. So when Gary and I look at this from a trust-based perspective, there are 5 key themes, certainly in my experience working in the C-suite, and like I said, hearing dozens of C-level executives share their feedback with my professional services firms clients about what they wish they understood. High degrees of complexity, serious resource constraints, big-time data overload, loneliness, as you all identified, and this experience of this sphere of influence and control that is huge. It's a big web, the kind of the span that you have to deal with, or at least think about, is enormous. Even if your experience of your C-level exec is that they function like this, with blinders on.
And when you think about it, going into your CXO's office and asking for 30 minutes on a project that for you is the largest one of the quarter, or maybe the largest one of the year, and the impact is huge, we go in thinking that this is the only thing they have to worry about. This is the only thing they have to listen to. This is the only decision they have to make and support. And the truth is, they're surrounded by that level of decision and larger decision, and what we're offering is one more thing, calling on their energy and their focus. So it really helps to put these glasses on and think about it from their perspective. What's the biggest derailer? Trust, credibility, reliability, intimacy. There is a biggest derailer to this, and I want to illustrate it to you with some examples. And I want to see if you can identify with one or more of these examples. Imagine me, Chief Human Resources Officer. People will finally listen to what I have to say. Oh, and I'll have a bigger office and my own admin. I get to hang out with the big guys. I'll play tennis and golf, and I'll be seen going to lunch and dinner and all of the important meetings. I have some power and prestige. And then there's the dollars. Oh yeah, we couldn't leave that off. There are the dollars. Finally, I can remodel the kitchen. Or maybe even just go ahead and buy the house I want. I can take a vacation that's real and not just go to my sister's house and see her and the kids. Jewelry, that sports car. Oh, and the promotion means a bigger salary and more bonus potential. Anyone tempted? Just a little? And then to use that power to pursue things that you know the organization needs. So you know what? I've been working on this new human resource management system. We need it terribly. And now that I have this influence, we by golly are going to get it. Have you ever done such a great job introducing an idea to a group that after about 3 iterations of discussion, someone else in the room thought it was theirs? You're good when that happens. But aren't we tempted sometimes to say, wait. Let's not forget, I'm the one that surfaced that idea. And the millions that we saved or the new product or service, that right here. Right? It was me. And then sometimes we talk to ourselves and we wonder, am I really ready to be at this level of influence? Am I smart enough? Can I run fast enough? Do I have what it takes? And I guess the opposite side is, when will they ever notice me? How many of us feel sometimes underloved, underappreciated, undervalued in our HR function? Okay, good. If I were to change the question because maybe it was worded a bit strongly, how many of us have felt at least a little undervalued, underappreciated in our role in human resources? All right, when you raise your hand, I want you to know you're not alone. I posted this kind of a discussion on several HR LinkedIn forums, and I can tell you, you are not alone. We all want to be noticed, and we want to be valued for what we do. Now, the biggest derailer of trust lives inside of us, and these are the thought clouds. Could you identify with some of them? There's nothing really wrong with them in and of themselves. It's about motive. What is the motive behind those thoughts? Andrea, why is motive so important?
Here's why motive is important. Remember my story of the shipyard, and I said what caught me up in that moment was just my very real, very understandable human vulnerability. That's what this is all about. It's our very real, understandable vulnerabilities, the things that have the attention on us rather than the attention being out there. What is driving, what is the reason behind what we're doing? Is it these kinds of things, or is it truly being of service? Now that sounds like such a platitude, and oh, it should be so easy that we should all want to do things out of being of service, and the reality is we're human beings. We have needs and fears and issues and stuff that comes up for us. In the version of the trust equation, this is captured as the S in the denominator, which stands for self-orientation. It simply relates to where is your focus? Is it over here or is it out there? And when we get scared or anxious or nervous or fill in the blank with any other synonym you can come up with, when we're operating primarily out of our agenda and our needs and our desires, our self-orientation is high, which according to this equation is bad. Because we want credibility, reliability, intimacy, the numerators in the equation, to be as high as possible, and we want to keep our self-orientation as low as possible. Now you'll notice if it's 0, the formula blows up. It's not possible. We're human beings. And I'm not saying, by the way, that you need to be selfless to be effective in the C-suite. What I am suggesting is that you be very self-aware and you manage yourself really well, which, by the way, happen to be the two underpinnings of emotional intelligence, self-awareness and self-management. Know what gets you hooked. I get hooked because I like to be liked. That's a lot of what hooked me that day in the shipyard. You may not care one iota about being liked. You care about something. Something else gets you hooked. And if it's not one of the thought bubbles on the prior slide, then there's something in there. The key is to catch it, not to try to teach it. Catch yourself, and manage yourself. And by the way, as Gary and I always say, if you are trying to get a seat at the table in the C-suite, here's our recommendation for you. Stop. Because more often than not, that trying to get the seat at the table is coming out of high self-orientation. Forget about it. Do what's right to do to be of service. Focus your attention there. It is ridiculously simple and appallingly hard all at the same time. Now, I'm going to give you a 2-minute lesson on what it takes to be influential, because we've covered what it takes to be trustworthy. It takes 4 things. The C stands for, the R stands for, the I, the S. Excellent. So here's what you need to know about being influential. It is as misunderstood as this whole topic of trustworthiness. When we go about influencing people, we apply the wrong operating model. Here's how most of us think, others think, and come to make decisions. We think it's a process of accumulating facts, applying logic, and coming up with some kind of answer. And even though it doesn't work time and time again, we still think this way. This is a very rational view of how human beings work. In order to be effective, we've got to get in the world of psychology, understand the psychology of it. So we turn to people like Dr. Robert Cialdini, also, by the way, a book that perennially shows up on top business book lists called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. Studied this subject for 35 years, identified 6 principles of influence. Not a single one has anything to do with ration and logic. The one we're going to focus on is what he called reciprocity, simply defined as the tendency to return a favor. And in the world of advice giving, which, let's face it, that's what you do, how reciprocity plays out is in the form of listening. As in, I, C-suite exec, am likely to listen to you, to be open to your influence when I feel you have actually fully listened to me. And conversely, I'll do you the favor of not listening if I feel like you've done me the favor of not listening. So paradoxically, it turns out that the key to being influential actually has very little to do with talking, knowing, and making a great case, and has everything to do with listening. And by the way, it has a lot to do with the quality of your listening. Because the kind of listening that most of us do when we're tweeting or thinking about texting or mind racing forward to what we have to handle at the end of the day is not the kind of listening we need to bring to bear. We have to listen on both the rational level and the non-rational level. We have to listen to the text and the subtext, the words and the emotions, and we have to prove that we're hearing them by paraphrasing and empathizing. It is not simply enough to hear. They have to have the experience of being heard. Something very, very different. And that means that if we want to be trusted advisors in the C-suite, here I go with that English language thing again, in the C-suite, we have to earn the right to be right. It is not enough to be right. In the words of Charlie Green, being right is vastly overrated. Being right too soon just pisses people off. So what it really takes to be influential is all about listening. Now, here's the other question. What does it take to make a habit of trust? Simple. Practice. That's it. You're not born with the ability to be trustworthy. You don't have a certain personality type that makes it easier for you to be trustworthy. There isn't some mythical chemistry thing that happens. It just takes practice, time and time and time again. And being willing to move past the awkwardness, like the awkwardness that you felt if you ever learned how to ride a bike the first time you ever got on. Practice and practice, practice. We have 7 tips for you for how to do this practice in the C-suite. Tip number 7, doing a countdown. Watch the CXO's watch, not yours. Pay attention to his or her attitude towards time. Be willing to say, hey, should we come back later? Or, hey, would you like to spend more time on this? Tip number 6, be a phenomenal empathetic listener. Earn the right to be right. Give them the experience of being heard.
And tip number 5, focus. Oftentimes we have a deck of 50 slides. When we go into the CXO office, we should have 5, if any. The headlines become the presentation. If they want more detail, they'll ask, and then we're on their time, and we can stay as long as they want us to. Or we can leave behind handouts that have the details. So focus. Speak plainly and truthfully. The higher you get in an organization, the less, paradoxically, the less people you have who will tell you the truth without an agenda. So if you and I can learn how to tell our CXOs the truth without having that agenda in our back pocket about what we want to come out of that, speaking truthfully and plainly, we'll become their trusted advisor. And then third, prepare like you always do to your regularly high level of excellence. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And then be prepared and willing to set it all aside if your CXO needs something else from you at that moment. In other words, it's all about the relationship.
Number 2, think out loud. It's a risky thing to do to share the formation of your thoughts, not just your thoughts. Be willing to do that. Because what it shows is that your commitment to collaboration is greater than your commitment to looking good. Be willing to think out loud. And number 1, focus. Mind your focus. Where is your attention? Is it over here or out there? Keep it out there. Keep your attention attuned to attunement. Dan Pink talked about attunement yesterday. It was so brilliant. Be attuned to what they need. Help your CXO make the best decision for him or her right now, regardless of the personal impact to you. 3 things we talked about. What it really takes to be trustworthy, which is CRINS. What it really takes to be influential, which is listening. Because of the phenomenon of reciprocity, what it takes to make a habit of trust is practice. Excellent. It has been our pleasure to be with you today. Would you please give yourselves a round of applause?